Well, thank you for the fine introduction. Today I want to talk about a hot topic because as we were talking at the table a few moments ago, there is a political opinion and then there is an economist opinion. And they don't necessarily match up. But unfortunately, we want economists to match political opinions and the political people, of course, particularly the governors, the president, and everybody else, wants the economists to match their political opinion. So that's a little bit of the background of what we're looking at here today. I am the editor of this survey that, as I said, we have been doing this. It's hard to believe, 44 years now that we have been doing this survey. We call it Current Business Trends, and it comes out at or near about the 6th of every month. It has several statistics associated with it, but this is the most important statistic. New orders. New orders is new business obviously coming into the firm. And we survey industrial purchasing agents up and down the West Michigan area here. And if you look very closely, you will see that we had a little bit of a dip over here for a while. Let's see if I can get this to, there we go. Get my little red dot to go here. You see, we did take a dip and we said for a while, here's the beginning of the recession. But then guess what? For the last several months, we've had an uptick, which indicates that there is not, in the industrial market at least, a recession pending. Now, the importance of this is the domino theory. Years ago, in the days of John Maynard Keynes, just as a for instance, it was a simple world. The entire auto industry was in 3 states, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana. The supply chains were quite short. The whole economy was much easier to judge, indicate, and everything else that we wanted. Now, of course, the supply chains are spread all over the world. And there's all kinds of things that can go wrong in the supply chains, as we have found out in recent history. Well, the problem, of course, is that the key to this in the industrial market is new orders. Because when the new orders come in, no money has changed hands yet. What has happened is that they start buying equipment, they start hiring people, they start ordering materials, and it builds, but it's based on new orders. The same is true in reverse. When we start to get to a recession, it's usually generated by these dominoes falling backward. The suppliers that belong to this survey right here, they represent about $15 billion of spend, and that's just the respondents to this survey. It's certainly not everything that's out there. But now assume that they cut back by 10%. That's $1.5 billion. Do you think that's going to have an impact on the economy? Well, obviously it is. And this is the power, if you will, of the Industrial Business Survey. You would never have heard the name Alan Greenspan if it weren't for the fact that he figured this out. But unfortunately, we have Federal Reserve chairs that have deviated from him, and they have their own thinking. Obviously, Powell was one of these people that was strained in the, I'm going to call it the backward thinking, if you will, of Keynesian economies. And unfortunately, he is the one that failed to raise interest rates soon enough, and hence created part of his own problem. Now, obviously, one of the biggest things that's affected then by new orders is production. And there are some economists that believe, well, this should be the key indicator right here. Production is everything. Well, it is, but it's driven by new orders. But once again, notice what has happened here recently. For the last several months, we've had an uptick in production. Hence, it doesn't look like there is a recession on the horizon right away. But again, I underline right away. You can see the way that these lines bounce around here. And yes, this could be just one of these bounces, but we don't think so right now. The employment index, following a similar trend, we had dipped negative for a while. Now the problem, of course, government statistics are laggards. Employment is a laggard statistic. We found that out in Economics 101. And so what we see right here, though, is that more recently, hires are exceeding layoffs. And that's a positive feature. We also, in the report that you have on your tables there, you will see that we have a table that basically just repeats what the government is telling us right now, the statistics that we get out of Lansing. The important thing to note is that we have not had a downturn as far as employment is concerned, or a downturn as far as, or an uptick, I guess I should say, as far as unemployment is concerned. We are still running just a little bit off of our all-time, or our 20-year lows, I guess I should say. All-time low in unemployment, incidentally, was back in 1953. If you can think of the peak buildup, if you will, of the war that was going on in Eastern Asia at that time, which we forgot was Korea, not Vietnam. At that point in time, we had 2.5% national unemployment. I underline that is headline unemployment. The statistics that we collect right now are 3 different levels at the lower end and 3 levels at the upper end. So U3 is the one that we call headline unemployment. And U6 has gotten a little bit more play lately because they say that's the real unemployment rate. But those are the people that are discouraged, the people that have been looking for work but not lately, those that are working part-time jobs but would like full-time jobs. That gets into that U6 number. And you'll see that all the way down here at the bottom. Nationally, right now, we're running about 6.5. Okay, business confidence. This is an important thing that we started collecting about 2013, and what it indicates is short-term and long-term business confidence. As I think you can see right here, just like the other statistics, we've had an uptick. We were running negative a year ago, and now we're back to positive. And I have to say, positive at both the long-term and the short-term levels compared to where we were. Again, this doesn't seem like we are headed for a recession. But now we look at the national surveys. 2 of them are important right now. One is S&P Global. This is a British firm that has been bought out by S&P. And as you can see, they have slid back to about break even. In fact, statistically, that's what a break even is 50. So at 49.2, the Institute for Supply Management, the other major survey, is also close to this break even line. Now, this isn't all bad because, once again, the Federal Reserve wants the economy to slow. And this is some indication that the economy is slowing but not collapsing. Now, the CPI came out just a couple of days ago, and that's gotten a lot of press lately. What you don't get out of that press release is the percentages of what these different things are. The biggest and most important, 41% of that index is what they call shelter. Shelter includes rent, and another statistic they call rent equivalent. If you own your own home, what would it rent for? And that's 30% of this 40% right here. And the rest of it is the cost of insurance, I'm going to say utilities, all the rest of that it takes to run a house these days, which is about 41%. Until that number moves, the unemployment rate the CPI is not going to come down. Now, this is the press release, literally, from that all I've done is cut and pasted it here from a couple of days ago. All items came out to this number right here, 3.4. Well, you're all well aware that the target is supposed to be 2% right now, and so they're way ahead of that. But the core inflation, which used to be the less variable, or the one that they could depend on for bringing the rest of the rate down, well, unfortunately, that's still running on the high side. So both of these things are higher than the Federal Reserve would like them to be. But you see this number down here, shelter, 5.5. Now take that 5.5, multiply by 40%, and guess what? You find out that most of this number right up here is that shelter number that we were looking at just a moment ago. So now, you've also heard of the PCE, personal consumption expenditures. We always just called it the deflator because this is what the Federal Reserve uses. These are two completely different agencies. One is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The other is the Bureau of Economic Research, and they both say they have the best measure of inflation. Well, needless to say, they too tend to track one another, but the PCE usually runs a little bit less than the CPI. But they will debate back and forth which is the best. And the Federal Reserve says they follow the PCE, but in practicality, they follow both. Come on, they can't ignore the CPI, because that's what the press is looking at. Now, where have our shifts occurred? And some of these are monumental, I might add. As you can see right here, food dollars shifting to dining out. Go back to 1990, which isn't all that long ago, and you can see that the overwhelming majority of our food budget went to buy groceries at the grocery store. Now the major part of our budget goes to eating out. We have become a lazy people, I guess I'm going to have to say. And even if you go to the grocery store, stand behind anybody that's checking out, and you're going to see they're buying a whole bunch of prepared foods. Everything from pizzas to frozen macaroni to whatever. And the staples, which are relatively cheap, I mean sugar and flour and all of that, that stuff's dirt cheap at the stores these days. We pay less in this country for groceries than we do any place else in the world. Travel to the rest of the world and look at what they pay for groceries. They pay about twice what we do. And that's in the developed countries. In the underdeveloped countries, it's even more. So keep that in mind. The other thing to keep in mind, what has happened just since the pandemic, I have no idea why we've made this mad rush on the restaurants, but we have. And this is a change that obviously has occurred. I don't know how long this trend is going to last, but this is why you have seen some restaurants close that had been here for a long time. And at the same time, you go to the restaurant and they say, oh, well, we're short-staffed, your dinner is going to be a little slow tonight. And that they always have that help wanted sign out. Inflation rates vary from one end of the country to the other. I mean, I'm not telling you anything new, and you know that it costs a lot more to live in New York City than it does to live in Kalamazoo. But on the other hand, all we see basically is that average, if you will, for the entire nation. And we base everything. Our Social Security increases are based on that. Labor contracts are based on that. And our perception of what we ought to be doing is based on generally what that number turns out to be, the headline number that they give us every month. But from one end of the country to the other, you can see a variation of from 6.7% down to 2.2%. There's a huge variation. But again, this is not necessarily reflected. I might add the CPI is the CPIU, the all urban, as they call it. It does not include the far rural areas. It is called the all urban index because that's the way that it started way back. And I could spend another 2 hours talking about the history of how these things got to where they are, but it's sufficient for us to say right now that this is the way it is, and we need to look at some other things that are also, I call, systemic changes. First of all, the computer revolution that began early in my lifetime, it is far, far from over, and it will not be over at the for any of you in this room right here. It is an ongoing revolution. And part of this relates to Moore's Law. Remember, Moore's Law said number of transistors, this is the formal definition, number of transistors on an integrated circuit will double about every 2 years. Well, somebody assumed that this was going to top out at some point, and it has not. And I don't know if there is an end to this Moore's Law. Not in my lifetime, and not in the lifetime of most of you in this room right here. This is going to keep going. This is going to continue to drive more and more and more technical and computer types of things. As a result, though, the cost of electronics will continue to fall. I mean, if any of you have gone to any of the major big box stores and looked at what these televisions are costing these days, what is driving out of business, obviously, is the television repair people. You can't afford to repair them anymore. You throw them away. If it's under 32 inches, you can't buy it anymore. And 32 inches, well, boy, I grew up in the age of when a 21-inch television was a big deal. Oh, boy. Well, anyway, this is the result of Moore's Law. We've gone from 1,000 to 50 billion in the space of about 50 years. And I think we could keep this line right on going because it doesn't seem to have slacked off. Now, worldwide changes, and this is extremely important. As of 2020, 70% to 75%, I guess I said right here, of the global population is connected to or has access to a mobile phone. You know those phones you trade in? Those are repurposed and sold to the third world. The third world all has cell phones now, and most of the countries found that it was a lot cheaper to put up those towers than it was to string wire. And so 75% of the world has those phones. When they cross the border down south, one of the first things they ask for is there a place I can plug my phone in to recharge so I can call the people back home and say, hey, I got here. And oh, by the way, everything is great here. They're putting me up in a hotel. They're giving me a credit card. Come on down. And that's the word that they are getting right now. This is unheard of, obviously, just a few years ago. About 50% of the global population owns or has an access to television. They are finding out how poor they are compared to the rest of the world. And as a result, we are the leaders in this country of television content. Over half of the content, I was in Germany about 6 years ago. They had the usual 30 channels, or no, it was a much larger number of channels, but there was Hogan's Heroes reruns on one channel, dubbed into German, of course. So, gosh, I said, holy cats. We're airing our dirty laundry to the rest of the world to a certain extent. And this is the important thing down here. Pew Research, you see down here, 2 billion people, according to Pew Research, given the choice, would move to America on almost a moment's notice. Now, think of what that would be if we had 2 billion people that invaded us. Life as we know it would be unmanageable, to the least. Okay, that brings us to print advertising. This is another one of these systemic things that I never thought was going to happen. I never thought Time magazine was going to virtually disappear. I never thought that, well, many of you were in town when they built the new Kalamazoo Gazette building, and 15 years later they were tearing it down. We just never believed that that could happen in our lifetime. But look at the change that has happened in print advertising. As a result of that print advertising decline, newspapers and all the printed media have declined. The peak was 1982 for that, and for the decline in the USPS, the postal people, we never believed that that was going to take as big of a hit as it did. But they hit their peak back in 2002, and I lived near 9th Street, and I watched them close that SCF over there and said, well, we just don't have the volume that we used to have. We never believed that that was going to happen, but this is permanent and irreversible. This is probably the worst of the lot right here. This is China's social credit system. They have social security numbers just like we do. Oh, by the way, they have your social security number too. And they are collecting data, just like most of the services that we use right now. I mean, I could not figure out Google's business model for a while, until I finally figured out that they were watching everything I do and then selling it to advertisers based on what I'm doing. I keep track of the office furniture business because that's one of our cyclical industries. And as soon as I Google something for office furniture, I start getting advertisements for office furniture. And I'm just checking on the industry. Well, China is not interested in the commercial end. They're interested in the political end. And they have all their people ranked within this system. So if you show up to a pro-democracy rally of some sort, you're going to be way the heck down the line here. And they are collecting this data on you right now. Don't kid yourself, because this is their long-term plan. And as I said, this is the reason that TikTok is so darn controversial right now. And I think rightly so. If we can't keep track of who is tracking all of us, we have a problem over the long term. Okay, another thing that I never thought was going to happen. Growing up, we always said, oh, the world population is expanding and eventually we're going to run out of food and we're going to have to ration food and all the rest of that stuff. And guess what? We never expected that the fertility rate worldwide was going to fall. Now, this 2.1 that you see right here, that is basically the maintenance level, I guess we would have to say. 2.1 is, if I can get the 2.1, there it is. That's the maintenance level. We're at 1.6 in the United States right now, which means we are a negative population growth country without having immigrants. So just to maintain ourselves, we have to have immigrants. Same thing is the case with most of Western Europe. Have to have immigrants to maintain themselves. The problem is managing that properly, and that's where we start to run into difficulties. Furthermore, the big countries of the world, 35% of the world's population is in China and India. Well, guess what? For India and China, China had their one-child policy, and then we got down to India here that is also adapting a much, much lower fertility rate. So the entire world is probably going to top out about 2060 or something like that. And then they're starting to talk about, well, gee, what happens when we go down the other side of the curve? Well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But right now, that issue of running out of food because the world is going to expand population too big seems to be a thing of the past. Other major changes, I want to make you aware that we are still the world's major currency, the dollar. And we are still the major trade deficit, and we aren't paying any attention to it. Our trade deficit is with China primarily, no surprise there. And guess what? Here's Chinese acquisition of agricultural land. You see the relationship between the two? We're selling our country off one piece at a time. It won't affect my generation, but it will the younger generation in the room here. You better watch this, because the Chinese are going to end up owning a whole bunch. Case-Shiller Home Price Index. Homes used to be to live in, not to flip. And we got into this speculation era, and now we have people flipping homes, not living in them. Who is burning the coal? I don't know why the logic of this just escapes most people. China is the one burning the coal, and we can close coal plants until the proverbial cows come home, and for every one that we close, China's opening 3 more. Doesn't make a great deal of sense to me that we're all that upset about closing coal plants. CO2 emissions are down in this country. Yes, we are having an impact, but a lot of that is natural gas. Credit card payoffs, we were talking about this at the table a moment ago. 28% is the average on credit cards right now, and we have about $1.5 billion, $1.5 trillion out there on credit cards. This is going to make a major crunch going forward. This is one of the bubbles that we have to watch. Natural gas prices, if you lived in Europe, I think the last power bill that I had, that was $2.40 or something like that. The spot price right now is about $1.60 or something like that. Guess what? In Europe, they got up to $80 or $90. That's when they closed the Nord Stream pipeline. Leading LNG exporters, obviously the United States is the leading exporter now. And here's an LNG ship. And here's the major importers, Japan, South Korea, and China. And yes, the world is shifting. Current slave population, and guess what? There are still slaves in the world. That didn't disappear in 1865, like some people think. Major gold importers are Switzerland, followed by China. See that, $76 billion? Guess who produces the most gold? I don't know what they're up to here, but the Chinese are going to come up with some kind of a gold-backed currency someplace down the line. But these people are very patient. This may be a 6-year plan or something like that. I put this up because it appeared in one of the Upjohn Institute studies. You see all those yellow areas? Those are declining areas in Kalamazoo. Think about that for a moment. A lot of Kalamazoo is listed as declining, and just a very few are listed as desirable or expanding. There was this thing that was in Consumers Report. College kind of ruined my life because they ran up a great big debt, and they had a degree in South American art history, and they wondered where their job was. So my alma mater was Central Michigan University. They are down 42%. Western is down about 30%. Grand Valley, where I still have an affiliation, they are only down 12% because they stayed open during COVID. You have to think about that for a moment. Okay, I'm to that point that I need to field a few questions or things that you'd like to talk about. Oh, okay, great.
I got a microphone here for
okay.
our audience so we can all hear the questions.
Okay.
You guys know it all?
I have a good question referencing Moore's Law and how that correlates with just the impact factor of AI. How does that correlate, and what do you see as that trajectory going forward?
Well, there's obviously a direct correlation there. Do any of you watch the Weather Channel? Who owns the Weather Channel? IBM. What do you think they're up to? AI. They are trying to come up with a better weather forecast. And it's going to take them 10 years, and they've said that right now. But we're going to have far, far more accurate weather in about 10 years than what we have right now. So there is a direct correlation. We can't have AI without Moore's law, I guess is the way that we should put it. Other thoughts?
Do you think it's a smart thing to avoid TikTok then, based on what you were saying?
I would say the question was, should we avoid TikTok? Not necessarily. Just be careful what you put on TikTok, because you may be exposing yourself. You know, incidentally, if you belong to a Christian Business Roundtable, that puts you down further on the thing here. Okay. Sorry, all of you in this room here have gotten downgraded just by what you belong to. Yes.
Are there certain markets or industries that are performing really well in the economy?
The industries that are performing obviously the best right now are those that are reaching forward. Obviously, the technical industries, we're relying more and more on technology. They are the ones that seem to be on what I'm going to call the leading edge. On the other hand, somebody said, well, yeah, but where should you have your money? And that becomes a frequent question among long-term financial planners. I said, you have to watch where the value is going. I said, if we run into a period where we stay at 3% inflation going forward, obviously the value is going to be in the things that have assets. That means all the non-ferrous metals, and it also means property, business, real estate, and that type of thing. And incidentally, for low-income people, food is falling and still is falling in price. Low-income people have all the clothing they want because of lots of free sources, and furthermore, it's only $3 on the discount rack at Walmart. But housing, on the other hand, for low-income people is higher, and part of this relates to, again, the higher interest rates. The higher interest rates have driven the cost of housing higher. And I said the Fed is, to a certain extent, chasing its tail when it raises interest rates, because it raises the interest rates and then it raises this 40% that we were talking about here that relates to housing. They're just not catching up. Wisely, they've said that they're going to leave rates where they are right now until they are sure. On the other hand, they don't want to get into the loop that they got into back in the 70s, where they cut rates too soon, and then inflation took off again, then they cut rates again, and then the thing perpetuated itself. And the only way out of it was Paul Volcker. And Paul Volcker cranked the rates up so high that everybody wanted to hold dollars. But we went off the gold standard in 1971, and that was the major change of what happened. Nobody wanted to hold dollars anymore. But one fine day, when the interest rates got up to 16, 17, 18% for CDs, everybody wanted to hold dollars again. And we ended up with about 40 years worth of price stability as a result of that. We didn't run into trouble until we got into this pandemic. And again, the Fed made a mistake coming out of it, not raising rates quick enough when they saw inflation taking off. Other thoughts? Yes?
What do you think is the outlook for manufacturing in the U.S. and even West Michigan for that matter?
West Michigan is in a little bit better shape because it is automotive related. The amount that we were importing from China is not really all that great, and when it got stopped up in the supply chain, we found out that we weren't saving as much money as we thought. We are reshoring a tremendous number of things in automotive right now. The theory of supply chain management says you're supposed to know for your finished product, not the floor wax and light bulbs and that type of thing. For your finished product, you're supposed to know that entire supply chain all the way back to the hole in the ground that the raw material came from. Well, we lost track of that, and that's what happened. We had some very minor things, including computer chips being a major case. We had a lot of vehicles that could not be shipped because they lacked one $15 chip. And until we got those chips, we couldn't push it forward. And those chips were all made overseas. We had long since lost our local suppliers. They're not going to make that mistake again, particularly for these $15 items. So I see Michigan in a pretty good position as far as reshoring is concerned. Other thoughts? Yes.
Just quick question. So you kind of started off your talk about how politics and economists may sometimes look at the same data and come to different conclusions. Is that fair?
Yes.
So you talk about China is accumulating gold. China is accumulating our agriculture. They're monitoring social media. They're building coal plants. On the other hand, they're experiencing a low birth rate as well. People would say that they're subsidizing their economy. So I'm just curious, if, as an economist that has comments on the political side, what would you say that our position with China should be?
Well, the biggest mistake we made is to let them take this big of a chunk of our economy. We let them join the World Trade Organization, and unfortunately we have salespeople in this country that say, oh, I can sell ice cubes to Eskimos, just let me at that 1.3 billion people or whatever, I'm going to sell them my product and every other product. And we got over there and we couldn't sell them our product. And the ratio of what we were importing versus what we were exporting has gotten way, way the heck out of whack. We let that happen to ourselves, and we are just now starting to correct that. But it was in part a case of the population in general. They turned it over, they saw it was made in China, and that was just fine to buy. And needless to say, we were creating our own problem every time we bought something from China. Now, the big deficit, incidentally, is our dang cell phones. Over 25% of the deficit that I had up here a moment ago was just cell phones that are made in China. How we ended up with not encouraging these production facilities to be built in the United States, I still don't quite understand. Part of it relates to education, part of it relates to industrial policy, and part of it is a case that we saw it happening and then just let it keep right on happening. And I think we're going to see a reversal of that. In fact, if you look at China's numbers right now, they are lamenting that the business that they're doing with the United States is beginning to decline. And I'm thinking that this probably will continue, but again, we created this mess. We've become dependent on China for too many things. It's going to take us another 10, 15, 20 years to unwind it, even if we do unwind it.